Welcome to Talk Back. Today we will be discussing reforms in one of the most crucial areas of the Indian economy, the power sector. To do this, I have with me none other than the man who can make it happen, the Minister for Power in the Government of India, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Welcome to the program, Mr. Prabhu. Now, this is the age of globalization, integration with the rest of the world, competitiveness and all that. We are talking about growth of exports of 20% per year. Indian industry needs to be competitive. And yet, when you look at the cost of power, we have a situation where Indian industry is paying rupees 4 to 5 per kilowatt hour, which is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And other industries in the rest of the world are paying on average half of that, 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Why does power cost so much more in our country?
Yeah, in fact, this is one of the most moot point on which why the reforms are needed in the power sector. You very correctly said that we are planning to increase our exports by 20-22% every year from now onwards. And therefore, we have to be competitive, because if our Indian products have to compete in the world markets, then they have to be competitive. But now the situation is also that not only the Indian products have to compete with the world products in the world market, but the world products in Indian markets. Yes. Because of the globalization and because the quantitative restrictions being removed, virtually all products can be imported, and those products will have to compete with Indian manufacturers who have a disadvantageous position on account of the fact that they pay higher power cost, they pay higher financial cost, and therefore the power sector, the real power sector, needs to definitely provide power to the manufacturing sector at a rate at which this same power is available to their competitors worldwide. And why it is happening like this is because of cost subsidization. It is also happening because the power utilities, who should be making profits, are not making enough money, and therefore they pass on this burden of thefts, of inefficiencies onto the consumers, who have no other choice but to pay.
You mentioned first cross subsidization. Would you explain to our viewers what you mean by that?
You know, because there are different categories of consumers. The manufacturing sector draws power from the grid. There is a household sector which also uses the power. There is the agriculture sector. In many of the states, the agriculture sector is not being taxed at all. They are not
paying at all.
Mm-hmm. And therefore, what we have said is, in the recent meeting of the chief ministers, which unanimously has accepted with the exception of 2 states, that all the states must charge minimum of 50% for that sector.
But Mr. Prabhu, this is not the first time that you've had such a meeting.
That's right.
We've had these meetings before. Chief ministers come and say something, then they go back and they don't implement.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, in 1992, the then National Development Council had constituted a committee in which the then Chief Minister of Maharashtra, West Bengal, and many of the states were members, and they also decided the same thing. But a change now that is taking place, which is very institutionalized, is that all the states will be obliged to create an institution of regulators. These regulatory commissions then would decide the tariffs, and one of the mandates for that regulatory commission while determining such tariff is to remove the cost subsidization that exists in the tariff structure. That the central government is signing with more or less all the states, is that you must set it up, the regulatory commission, you must allow them to function freely, and then you must obey their orders.
Are you setting up some criterion which all these regulatory commissions will follow in setting up tariffs? For example, let me just put a question to you very simply. Today, we have a situation in Delhi where the transmission and distribution losses are close to 50%. And if you have a regulatory commission, which comes in and sets a tariff, let's say the distribution is privatized, you have to make some assumption at what rate these transmission and distribution losses will be reduced over time. And suppose one regulatory commission says that you must reduce it by 10% every year, another regulatory commission, another state says 2% is enough or 3% is enough. So you get very different prices at which, the regulatory commission will say you must sell electricity to the consumer. Is the center doing something to see that there is some regularity, some harmonization in all this?
Unfortunately, what has happened is that you're absolutely right. There's no harmonization, there's no uniformity in the order that they have been issuing. We are trying to do is we are trying to create an informal structure of regulators. And therefore the Central Regulatory Commission chairman, who was a very eminent person who retired only recently, Professor Rao,
Yes.
has been informally meeting these regulators to create that forum and try to bring in some sort of uniformity. But as the Act stands today, there's a freedom given to the state regulators, and the state regulators can act. Maybe it's about the time that we can think about how we can independently fund from the consolidated fund of India the cost that regulators would be incurring. Then to that extent they'll have some independence of operation. At the same time, it's also necessary that we should realize that regulators must confine themselves into the overall ambit of what the regulation requires and should not go beyond it.
Now you see, one is the question of the right price, but there is an additional question in the mind of the consumer. It is not just rational pricing, but when they know that the state electricity boards are run in a very inefficient manner, when they are making huge losses, when they are not paying the central public sector undertakings, their dues, and all this is then going to be lapped on to the consumer. So the government, because of all these inefficiencies, is reluctant to charge the right price. And even when they go halfway and they say, you pay this much, consumer says, how dare you make us pay, because there is hardly assured electricity. So there is this vicious circle, and how do you propose to break this vicious circle?
I think this is again a very important point on which we have already taken initiative. It is like this, that the quality of power is as important as the price that you pay for it. If you get a value for money that you pay, then people will be willing to pay. Unfortunately, what is happening is that, as you very correctly said, that these inefficiencies are being passed on to the consumer, and we want to collect, along with the service charge for the service provided, also the additional cost for these inefficiencies that are built in to the system. So therefore, what we are trying to do is that the central government is giving money to the to the state utilities under the program called Accelerated Power Development Program. There are two components of the program. One is to bring about improvement in the distribution sector. Other is, of course, to improve the repairs and modernization and improve the plant load factor of some of the existing power plants who are outdated and old.
These are grants that you are giving,
That's right. We are giving grants.
And what sort of magnitude? How much money is involved?
It will be something like 1,000 crores from the budget this year, that is the year which just passed by, as well as 1,500 crores additional from the next year, as well as equal amount as a loan from Power Finance Corporation or Rural Electrification Corporation. So it's almost 3,000 crores. But we are willing to give even more money from some of the multilateral agencies with whom I am negotiating. But the program is that if the states can invest this money into improvement of distribution network in the states, like making investments into capacitors, into transformers, into feeders, which go a long way in improving the quality of power. Today what is happening is that the only way that people feel that the reforms is taking place when the tariff increases.
Yes.
Not necessarily the quality improves.
Correct.
So therefore what we are saying is that first improve the quality. I am very confident that people will be willing to come forward and pay for the increased tariff. But unless we do this, so therefore we are coming out with this initiative, and unless we do this, bring about an improvement in quality first and then follow it up with reasonable level of tariff, then and then only the reforms will succeed.
So what you are saying is there is a bit of conditionality built in.
That's it.
That if you reform your power sector, you will get a grant.
That's
this
it.
will be a grant or a loan?
Much of it is grant, part of it is loan. But the loan also is it's like the loan which states get it from the central government, which has a long maturity, long repayment periods. And I think that should be very soft loan, so they should have no difficulty in coping with the repayment of that. The mechanism that we are institutionalizing is that a state which is going to get this money, that money will be transferred to a separate designated account to be operated only by the electricity board of that state and to be used only for the purpose for which it is meant. So we are really making a departure from the past in which the block amounts were transferred to the states and they were of course required to spend it on that, but there was no such strict institutionalized mechanism to make sure that there is no diversion of funds, which is what we are trying to do.
You know, it's very interesting the way you are now addressing these issues. In 1991, when reforms first began and when Government of India announced that private sector could now come into power, there was this presumption that power investment from the private sector will really help solve the problem in this very crucial bottleneck for the economy. But what we have seen in the last 10 years is, with all the fast track and all the talk of opening the doors, we really have not had investment in power generation. So do you think that really we need to address the distribution problems first before investors, both in the economy or foreign investors, before they will come in with their investments in power generation?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let me give one figure. There is a cost of supply which is captured by way of considering all the expenses which go into generation, to the distribution, to the end user, whatever the chain of event that goes into that, and whatever the expense incurred on that is calculated, and the cost of power, cost of supply of power is calculated. And then there is a average cost of tariff. That is the amount that electricity boards are required to collect on the power that is sold. Now, this is the difference between the two can result into profit or loss. Now today, the cost of supply of power is 1 rupee higher than average cost of tariff. As a result of which, every unit of power sold is causing loss of 1 rupee to the state electricity boards. The state electricity boards last year were required to sell 500 billion units. You can imagine the loss is 50,000 crores, which otherwise would have come into the system, is escaping the system. Of course, there is an inevitable T&D loss, which is bound to take place about 15-16%, which is acceptable. So not that entire 50,000 could have come in. I'm just trying to illustrate a point that the reforms not having taken place at the distribution end, which could have improved the system, and probably then the power sector could have been turned around. Now when the power is lost at the distribution end, at that point of time, the maximum value addition has already taken place at generation and transmission end, and you lose that entire amount. So therefore the loss is colossal. So therefore I think if we can turn this around and bring in changes in distribution first, upfront, then what happens is automatically the sector, which is now losing something like 20,000 crores per annum, and as I said, this difference is 50,000. If you can turn it around, then the surplus can then be enough to attract investment from the generators to come into this sector. Particularly when you are assuring 16% post-tax returns in dollar terms, I don't see any reason why they are not coming in, and the only reason why they are not coming in is that what you are assuring is 16% post-tax, but you are first sinking your money, which is not safe.
But you know, in fact, what you are saying is politically not that easy. You know, if consumers have been used to not paying for electricity, as I see it, I think part of the reason we went for the Enron type approach was that we thought we'll buy some time. In 4 or 5 years, by the time electricity comes up, then people see more electricity coming up, we will start also charging them more. But what happened was those 5 years came and governments still don't have the courage to charge the right price. So do you think that even in the absence of more investment in power sector, that people would be willing to say, all right, you know, we'll pay more? If distribution reforms are put up front, it'll be even more difficult.
Yeah, but you know, firstly, there are two things what we are trying to do to address this problem. Firstly, we are trying to create an awareness in the minds of people. So we want to use the mass media, we want to go and talk to them. I'm already writing letters to the opinion makers, who in turn hopefully will spread this message that power is a commodity which cannot be imported, unlike food or oil. If there is a scarcity, there's a shortage, there's a crisis, then we'll all have to face it.
True.
And this is one commodity which can affect all the sectors of economy, like the manufacturing, the services and agriculture.
Even IT cannot function without
Absolutely.
power.
So therefore, this is something which is inevitably going to cause total disruption in socio-economic life of the country. So this is one, is awareness. Secondly, as I said earlier, is not necessarily that reform should lead to increase in tariffs. In fact, the success of reform should be that over a period of time, it should result into fall in tariffs, not increase in tariffs. But initially, to bridge this gap between cost of supply and cost of tariff, is one of the ways to do it is to increase tariff, other ways to reduce the cost of supply. So I think both the things must happen parallelly. You must make sure that the cost of supply also goes down, and for that the thefts, which account for almost 20,000 crores, have to be arrested quickly. Again, we must make enough investment into distribution sector, which will bring down the cost of supply again. Because there is a slippage in the system, not just thefts, but because of inadequate technical support, and in insufficient technical interventions, the power sector is suffering at distribution end. So if we can make enough investment. So this program of the central government, which is supporting the state and helping them to make investment into distribution, which has not been done all throughout. Ideally, or by thumb rule or conventional wisdom demands that when you make 1 rupee investment into generation, you must make the same matching investment into transmission and distribution. But we always made investment into generation because that's what shows some results. But unfortunately have ignored and neglected the transmission and distribution, the fruits of which are now in front of us.
Now, Mr. Prabhu, you know that today as much as 20% of total power generated in the economy is through captive power plants.
Yeah.
Now that is really not a most efficient way of generating power, and what is worse, because the state electricity boards are threatened by these captive power units, there are states which are taxing captive power units. What are from the center to solve this problem?
Yeah. Of course, it is absolutely right that it's 20,000 megawatts almost, and when we have installed capacity of 100,000 for the grid, it is 20,000 outside the grid, which is almost 20% of that. Of course, one of the ways that we are trying to do is to address this is that some of these captive generators have excess capacity. They are not operating their plants to the full capacity. And therefore, if we can offer enough incentives, then probably some of this power can come into the grid with the shortest possible time and with the least investment.
Has it happened at all?
Not yet. So we are coming out with a new captive generation policy very soon. Of course, one of the ticklish issue is that state electricity boards must agree to this. And therefore, one of the ways we can do it is offer them incentives. For example, as you know, in every power generation plant, there is a fixed cost, which includes cost for depreciation, for the investment that has gone into it, the servicing of the loan, and return on equity. As well as there is a variable cost, like the fuel cost. Now, even if we can pay the entire fuel cost for operating that plant, and part of the fixed cost, probably there will be enough incentive for the captive generator to generate more and put that power into the grid. And thereby, we can even get a cheaper power in the shortest possible time. Because the problem is that we have almost a peak level shortage of 16 to 17% as of today. And to meet that target, meet that deficiency, one of the ways we are doing it is, as you said, add more capacities. But that's going to take some time because capacities are not going to be generated overnight. So the short-term measure that we are going into, one of these is this captive plant. Other one is what we are trying to do is also improve the repairs and modernization program and thereby bring in, improve the plant load factor. Also bring in power from the eastern region. There is a possibility of getting at least 6 to 10,000 megawatts of power from the eastern grid into the other grids like southern, northern and western. And that is not happening because we could not evacuate that power in the absence of proper transmission system. So I ordered only about a few days ago when I discovered this and said that we must do it upfront without waiting even to find out who is going to buy that power, because that's the backbone of infrastructure that we'll be creating. So that's what we are doing. We are also trying to improve the demand side management. It is possible that we can improve and bring in more power into the system to as high as 40% if we can bring some improvements into the manufacturing practices, into the household users practices. Yes. Because some of the bulbs that we use, some of the gadgets that we use are very energy guzzlers. So we can save that. Again, it is always estimated that 1 unit of power saved at a distribution end does not require additional 3 units of power to be generated.
Yes, correct.
So therefore,
conservation is very, very important.
Right. So we are doing that also.
Mr. Prabhu, we don't seem to be hearing much about hydel power sources anymore. Do you have any plans to revive the use of hydel power?
Today, in 100,000 megawatt of our installed capacity, the contribution of hydel power is only 24%. And ideally, as we say that the thermal hydro mix should be 60-40, and so therefore we really need to increase it substantially, particularly to meet the peak level demand. And that's something which can be made very easily by the hydropower. Again, we must have a fresh look at our liquid fuel policy, because all these liquid fuels which are imported and therefore are exposed to currency risk are also exposed to international fluctuation in the market of crude oil, because they are directly or indirectly linked to the crude oil prices. And therefore we really need to rely on something which is the fuel is available locally. And water, I don't think India has a very huge water, but it's a non-consumptive use of water when we generate power from hydro sources. And therefore we have decided to tap it. One estimate is that 150,000 megawatt of hydropower is available in India. I asked the Central Electricity Authority to conduct preliminary survey and investigation, which should be available within the next 3 to 4 months. Based on that, we want to organize an event of how hydropower development will help India's economy, because even during the process of development of hydropower, all the sectors of economy will get a tremendous boost. Nuclear power is another thing which...
France is one country that has really successfully...
Absolutely. In fact, our contribution of nuclear power to the grid is only 2.5%. Only 2,500 megawatt of nuclear power is generated. I was at extensive talk with the nuclear power people, and including Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Dr. Abdul Kalam, and Mr. Chaturvedi. And now we have decided that they are planning 1,000 megawatt to be added every year. I requested them that they should do that 2,000 megawatts per annum, because nuclear, like hydro, can meet our peak level requirement. Also, the fuel which is locally available.
Correct.
And therefore that's another advantage. And now I think our country has acquired enough expertise and stabilized technologies so that we don't have to wait for 10 years for a plant to be completed. We can do it in a much faster pace. So that's another thing. The third one which we want to really target is a renewable source.
Yes.
In fact, that's also very critical, and the country has set 1,000 megawatt target, again like nuclear for this. I'm requesting them that we should do it 2,000 megawatt per annum. And we have a huge potential for solar and tidal. In fact, one estimate goes that the tidal energy that can be generated in India could be as high as 50,000 megawatts. Of course, unfortunately, nobody has really tapped it to the extent to which it should be.
I have no doubt that with all these programs, and if one looks 20 years from now, you know, with these non-conventional sources also, we'll certainly make a difference. But as a central minister of power, do you sometimes feel powerless that in this very important area, responsibility is really divided? And unless you carry the states with you, how do we move to the next stage of, you know, critically bridging this gap? And let me ask you in this context, what do you think of where we stand on the whole Enron question?
Yeah, of course. Firstly, what you say is absolutely right, that since this responsibility is divided between states and the central government, I think the central power minister is a nodal point for receiving criticism for the power sector, whereas the action for changing the scenario lies with the states. But as the things stand, we have to work in collaboration with the states, and I'm very, very positive. In fact, the response that I'm getting from all the chief ministers, irrespective of their party affiliations, is extremely positive. In fact, when we had a meeting of all the chief ministers in Delhi on the 3rd of March, which was presided over by our Honorable Prime Minister, we could pass all the resolutions unanimously. And the parties who actually came forward to support the resolutions were all non-India parties. So this is something which augurs well for the future. As for the Enron is concerned, this is one project which has been entered. The agreement is between the Dabhol Power Company and the Maharashtra Electricity Board. The Maharashtra government has appointed a review committee under the chairmanship of Mr. Godbole. So we are awaiting their response.
But you know, it's one project which has been blessed by all the political parties when they have been in power.
I know.
And yet it keeps
and
coming
opposed
up
when
with
they were not in power.
And yes, but then why is it that we still can't take a clear view on where we stand?
You know, in fact, one of the ways to address this problem is to tackle the distribution sector issues. If we had solved the distribution problems, and then any generating company which wants to come into distribution could have also sold power directly to the consumers, probably this whole issue of giving guarantees and counter guarantees would not have been there. What we really need is a reform into the distribution sector which can make sure that the sector becomes viable. The price at which the product, the electricity is sold, it is collected by from the consumers, and obviously when you are selling it in the open market, you cannot sell it at a price which is not acceptable to the consumer, and there is a competition, so therefore this problem could have been addressed. Unfortunately, we have not done that. So what we are now saying is that reform the distribution sector first, not to reform distribution and to provide guarantees or counter guarantees. And counter guarantees without reforms will be counter reforms and not will really help the cause.
I think as I see your message as you speak, while you are pursuing these reforms, and certainly you are talking all the talk, what we hope is that you can walk the walk. But the sense that I get is that these are politically very difficult steps, and therefore you need moral suasion, to bring the chief ministers on your side. You need all the efficiency improvement to be credible to the people. And if you do that, then perhaps you can also develop the courage to charge and cover the cost of producing and delivering power in the economy. Would that be a correct way to read?
Absolutely. In fact, I realize that one of the ways and the only way it can succeed is to take people into confidence, to take the employees into confidence. I am going to write to individual consumer of electricity all throughout the country and also to the employees. And I am talking to the employees already. I am telling them that the only two significant beneficiaries of reforms is one is the consumer, and he has to be at the center point of all this reform process, and other is the employees. Because if the present state of affairs, as it is going on in the electricity boards continue, for the employees, and we work together, I think the only result that can come out of this is a change for better in the power sector.
I should have asked you this question earlier on, but I can't resist. I think corporatization will only get us that far. Don't you think we really need to move towards privatization of distribution to really solve this problem?
You know, in fact, I'll tell you, we really cannot say that this is one step is panacea to all ills. I don't think we can really simplify it. So therefore, what we are saying now, we have changed it completely. What we are saying now is that next 2 years, each of the state electricity board must break even, stop making losses, and third year onwards must start making surpluses. And how you do it? We are leaving it to the state government. If you want to do it through the process of corporatization, privatization, nationalization or socialization or whatever process, it must result into improvement in quality of service. It must result into profits, results into surpluses being generated, because that's the only way they can survive. Because they cannot survive on grants and they cannot survive on loans for a long period of time. And therefore, we are leaving it to the state government. We are telling them that this is what, you have to choose your own model. There is no one model available from Delhi. Don't look up to Delhi. Look into your own distribution setup and bring in improvement. And this is what the resolution of the chief ministers is. All the chief ministers pass this resolution, that in 3 years surpluses, 2 years break even. And how do you do it is left to them. But we have set up a very clear, well-defined parameters on which we can judge whether in 2 years it will happen or not happen.
So more power to the power minister to bring the reforms around across the states in this very important sector. With that, let me thank you, Mr. Prabhu. We'll be back same time, same day next week. Until then, goodbye.